The Fact Check podcast is hosted by three rehab professionals with decades of combined experience. But I'm not one of them. I'm just making this intro. If you are finding the world of health and musculoskeletal care confusing and contradicting, and let's be honest, at times a bit crazy, our efforts here are aimed against all that misinformation through real research and real evidence. Let's do this, people. Nothing you hear on this podcast should be considered medical advice.
Hey everyone, my name's Eliud. Online, I'm known as the Rehab Chiro, and I'm a chiropractor and health and fitness coach based out of the U.S. My practice is in Bloomingdale, Illinois, and today I'm joined by my co-host.
Hi, I'm Alexis Leveillé. I'm practicing in Montreal as a physical therapist. I got my master's from McGill, and most people online know me as the Nobullshitphysio, which is, my personality when I'm a skeptical asshole online. And this is kind of an extension of this. We're going to look at sometimes dubious, sometimes relevant claims and examine their scientific legitimacy.
Cool. So this podcast is called The Fact Check, and we created this as an effort to help parse through all the misinformation that's commonly plaguing the realm of musculoskeletal care. So the goal of this podcast is to help contain and eliminate the spread of misinformation in a way that's both constructive and entertaining to everyone.
Yeah. So today we're just going to give you a roadmap of the episode. So what's the structure of this podcast? So we will address claims made today by PRI, which is the Postural Restoration Institute, which Eliud will introduce to you guys. And one of its most prominent practitioners regarding the TMJ, so the temporomandibular joint, or the jaw, basically this guy. And its relationship to widespread and remote pain in the body by referring to both the evidence they provide, so PRI and Conor Harris, and basically the ones that we found by carefully scouring the internet and medical databases to see if there's legitimacy to these claims that your jaw is like causing all these ills and problems and making your posture worse, whatever that means. And then we will provide possible ways to integrate PRI in your practice ethically if you think after listening to all this that this is still something relevant, which, spoiler alert, we don't think it is. But if you want to, there's kind of a way out where you can find a middle ground.
Cool. So I think the first question is, what's PRI? So PRI is known as the Postural Restoration Institute. It was founded in the year 2000 and states that they're an organization that aims to explore the quote unquote science of postural adaptations, asymmetrical patterns, and the influence of polyarticular chains of muscles. The Institute, quote unquote, boasts that they have over 300 certified professionals, 100 PRI centers, and a myriad of courses. PRI was founded by Ron Hruska, who was a gentleman who dropped out of dental school to become a physical therapist. But he kept his interest in dentistry in an attempt to investigate why asymmetrical wear occurs in the teeth. By and large, PRI is concerned with body asymmetries and their supposed effects on the MSK system.
Yeah. We also want to preface this episode by saying that the fact that we're reviewing PRI is not a scientific endorsement of their practice. We've had some run-ins with them. I made a joke about PRI. I think they actually talked to me first because I made a post about them saying some of their theories were kind of odd. And I asked them for their best study, and it was such a trash study. I responded with the meme that was basically, the meme of the Earth exploding, and then it was like PR practitioners be like, "Oh no, this is really bad for my foot posture" or something. So I think they mean well. Some people that I know who interact with them a lot say they're a complete cult. But some people say that about Mormons. I'm not going to make any comments on that, but they are super nice. I can say that's been a common experience with people with PRI. I'd say that they're almost like to a fault, like they're super positive. They don't want to hear anything negative, and I think that kind of reflects in the way they interpret the literature. Like they just believe everything, and every negative thing is just, I don't know, they just didn't find a result, which is like a kind of a interesting way to look at science when science is built on proving itself wrong. So it's like you listen to science, but only with one ear. It's a bit odd. This episode is not an endorsement of PRI. And actually, I want to preface this by showing this by exploring. I've talked about it before on other podcasts, but me and other respected practitioners, I'm not including myself on that list, but other well-respected practitioners have found PRI citing evidence that directly contradicts what they're claiming to support themselves. I'll give you some examples. So, for instance, Clinton Lee, a well-respected NYC PT friend of mine, took their course, and he alleges that in their course material, they cite a paper as such. So the paper is Lavangi from 1999, and it's the association between static pelvic asymmetry and low back pain, something that's super common in PRI. It's like you got to fix these asymmetries to get people better. And they're citing, like, look, this is relevant. But the paper itself, cross-sectional case control approach, was used to estimate the association between low back pain of less than 12 months duration and pelvic asymmetries among 21 to 50-year-old patients seeking physical therapy services. And in conclusion is, in the absence of meaningful positive association between pelvic asymmetry and low back pain, evaluation and treatment strategies based on this premise should be questioned. And that's the paper they're using to support, like, look, pelvic asymmetries are relevant. And it's super strange because to me, it shows, there's a couple of options you could go there. Either they're idiots. I don't think that's true. They made so much money, so they're probably smart at some level. Or they have like so little, like they just don't expect to be fact checked to the point where there's millions of papers that, well, not millions, but there's a lot of papers, bad papers, that show a connection between pelvic asymmetries and pain. And it's like they didn't even bother to find one. That's like a really impressive amount of low effort grifting. So I almost like respect for this. Also from 2019, another paper that's included, and I think I got that one from Angus Bradley, a guy who does PRI, I think, in an ethical way. He just uses like, yeah, that's something you can do. He doesn't claim it like rock hard science. So it says it's an RCT. So Richardson from 2019. It's an RCT of 16 people, and I'm gonna pull it up right now because we prepared some data for this. So Caleb Richardson from 2019. It's a thesis submitted for a master's in exercise science. So you try to look at PRI, maybe he took a class and he found it interesting. And it's very detailed, but if you want to find it, it's this paper. The conclusion was that basically they did an RCT of 16 people examining muscle recruitment during a hex bar deadlift as outcome measures. And if you look at the paper, there's like, they don't show the whole thing, but there's so many, look at the table, there's so many variables. Hang on. With 16 people, there's more than 16 variables. So right away, it's going to be a great paper. This is clearly a well-powered paper. Obviously, I'm being sarcastic. But here's what they found. They said breathing exercise in between. What they did is basically the deadlifts. And then for the other one, they also, in the other group, the PRI group, they did deadlifts plus breathing exercise after. So 3 sets of breathing PRI exercise. Usually that's like the balloon ones. And then the conclusion itself, it says, based on our lack of significant findings, short-term non-manual PRI interventions and coaching does not appear to positively affect deadlift mechanics, which begs the question why PRI included it in their reference list. Like, honestly, why would you do that? It literally contradicts you. The only thing that changed is a little bit more posterior force in the right foot, only at the concentric phase of the deadlift. Considering they add more outcome measures than subjects, I don't think we should. I think it's probably more a spurious finding than anything. Yeah, that's like a nonsense paper, and that's like a common theme in this episode. You'll see like a lot of these papers are underpowered, they're super small, and the reason is because you get this thing called the small study effect, where when you have a lot of small papers, it's really easy to publish them when they're positive, but when they're negative, it's really easy to throw out. So you get all these papers that show a good effect in small numbers, but when it's really, really large, they won't replicate because it's not a real effect. So it's like statistical aberrations. We can see that from these things called a funnel plot, which is basically a graph that looks like a triangle and or a funnel, and someone's taken a bout out of it. And most times you'll see that bite is in the small negative studies, because these just don't get published. They're like, oh, we're not finding anything. Let's just scratch this paper, redesign. In fact, when I did my master's, that's kind of what the project was. Is like my teacher was like, "Yeah, we're not finding anything. Let's just change to where we're doing this paper and just scratch that data." So that kind of happens a lot because you want to find things to get published. I'm not shitting on my teacher; he's a good teacher. I just think I don't know, pressures. And then I'll just give the other one, Folk 2015, FAULK. It was an RCT of PRI versus traditional PT. So it was a sweeper stretch and a thrower stand. You can look that up. It's like a common baseball rehab series of exercise to increase the lack of shoulder glenohumeral internal rotation. So something that's really commonly missed in baseball throwers. It's like an adaptation. They lack a little bit more internal rotation than other stuff. And the conclusion is there was no statistically statistically significant differences between the two groups in how they affect glenohumeral internal rotation. It cannot be concluded the groups are different across time between groups, or that there is an interaction between the two groups. So they're saying like PRI doesn't beat the other group. So considering PRI has woo-woo kind of narratives, and you can just do the simple thing you can find online, I probably would skip PRI in this case, at least for increasing glenohumeral internal rotation for this case. Yeah, it's this paper. Thank you, Eliud. All right. Right now, I think what's most interesting is a lot of people keep asking me to review Conor. I've been hesitant because I know Conor is a super nice guy. He follows me. I follow him. I just disagree with a lot of what he says. So let's just give him a chance and let him shine in a YouTube video he did. His videos tend to do well. I think he's biggest on Instagram, but let's look that up. So the first one, and we're picking that one, but there's many papers that kind of echo the same thing. They all base it on the same paper. There's a video saying like, oh, chickens do this. And PRI is a really common claim for some reason. They look at animals and they're like, hey, animals do this. We should do this. But like, we're not a chicken. I think that should need to be said. Video is like 2 million views, and there's one that has 415,000 views, I think, done by Cairo, saying the same thing. But Conor's just like the video length was good for this format, so that's why we're using it, not because I have vendetta against them. All right, so let's pull that up. So the video is called "Is Your Jaw Ruining Your Posture?" 47,000 views, but on YouTube it has like on Instagram.
Today
it has,
I want to help open
views.
up your mind and show you the significant role that our jaw and our bite have on our posture and even our movement. When people think about the idea of posture, they're usually thinking about the position of the spine and also tight or underactive muscles. But that's just one piece of the puzzle, and what could be influencing those spine curves and tight or underactive muscles in the first place could be the position of your jaw and your bite. We have sensory receptors all over our bodies that help us understand where we are in space, what is touching what is moving in relationship to what, and how we need to better organize our body or our posture in order to effectively do what we need to do. One example of this within our skin would be raphe corpuscles, which are important for sensing stretches and micro stretches, which help us understand how our joints and muscles are moving in relationship to other things and where they could be in space. In our teeth themselves, we have something called periodontal ligaments, and these go within our gums, and these are very important and have been shown for helping us understand where our body is in space in relationship to our cranium and our jaw and our bite. If you've ever seen this creepy guy before, he's called the homunculus, and this guy represents visually our somatosensory.
I just want to brag and say this was discovered on the street I study at McGill, literally called Dr. Penfield. He would like open the brains of people and like poke them in the brain and be like, hey, what do you feel? Hey, what do you feel? And then see what moved. And yeah, that was done on whatever by Dr. Penfield. I'm better than you. Okay, kidding.
Sensory cortex, which is reflective of our motor functions and also our sensory abilities, and what areas of our body are most heavily used for that. 45% of our somatosensory cortex is made up of our teeth, our jaw, our lips, and our cheeks. And that's a pretty significant influence on our motor and sensory function. Our molars in particular, our back teeth, are very helpful for us feeling and sensing our heels and our ability to sense the ground underneath our heels. There was a systematic review released earlier this year that looked at a lot of different studies that looked into the jaw and the bite and its relationship to posture and movement. And what they found is that the majority of these studies did find somewhat of a meaningful connection there. And as for why some didn't, I want to discuss later, but I just want to review a couple of studies in particular to help you see kind of what's going on here. This study showed that when they introduced malocclusion or a poor bite pattern onto those that...
So I've actually reviewed all the studies that he cited, including the ones that Conor personally sent me, saying, hey, this is relevant, we should look at this. When I said, hey, I don't think this is relevant, I don't think we should look at this. So hang on, let me find this. So yeah, that's the first one. Who did that paper again? It's Yonita. Okay, let's get that one pulled out. And hang on. Paper's Conor cited. Yeah. So it was a systematic review that suggests that 63% of the studies it reviewed found a correlation between posture and occlusal, I can't say that word, but occlusal conditions or interventions to modify occlusion. First of all, This isn't much more than a coin flip. It's almost like 50%. It's 13% better than 50%. That's not a great like statistical relevance in my opinion. Especially given these studies were all small, an average of 40 participants with only 7 out of 26 of them even having a control group to compare to. Honestly, it's actually astonishing that only 63% of these studies showed an effect, considering 50% were case series, where you literally choose the participants you present. So honestly, I'd say that being like just 63% is actually like good proof that there's probably not much there that's relevant for musculoskeletal rehab. Also, there's no testing that was conducted to determine the presence of publication bias either. And again, that's problematic because publication bias could encapsulate what I was talking about earlier, the small study effect, where like they'll reject the small negative studies. And you'll see most of these studies are done by the same group. I don't remember the name of the guy, but it'll keep coming up. It's like these dentists really, for some reason, really want this to be a thing. And I think, I don't know them personally, but it feels like they have an agenda given the shitty quality of these studies and the fact that they never actually pull their money to do a study with a relevant sample size, actual control groups, like a decent study. This is like grifting 101, in my opinion, in a scientific way, I guess. Also, the paper does not talk about the magnitude of correlations observed. So it could be like a 3% correlation or 97% correlation. They do not discuss this, which is also suspicious. So like a lot of things correlate statistically without being clinically meaningful. So like if something is like, oh yeah, 90% of the papers show 1% correlation, honestly, who gives a shit? Like, but it's like, oh, it's connected. Like this is really all you can, like it might be connected. That's what it could be. And also for me, that kind of raises my suspicion that this is irrelevant. Because again, shitty ass papers where you choose the participant in a lot of cases, and you can't even find anything more than 63%. That's like abysmal. Okay, let's let the guy talk.
That the majority of these studies did find somewhat of a meaningful connection there. And as for why some didn't, I want to discuss later, but I just want to review a couple of studies in particular to help you see kind of what's going on here. This study showed that when they introduced malocclusion or a poor bite pattern onto those that did not have that before, they had significant changes in the pressure within their feet once they introduced those malocclusions. This study looked into scoliosis and showed that those with scoliosis had twice as high a likelihood of presenting with some sort of temporal mandibular dysfunction and also poor occlusion.
Okay, hang on. Let me just make sure that's the correct paper. Yeah, I have it. So it's the 2023. I just wrote the wrong number for some reason. Yeah, okay. This is the Japanese Bermuda's 2023 paper is another review, so reviewing the same papers presumably. But that one's a meta-analysis looking at the relationship between malocclusion and scoliosis from a sample of 14 studies comprising about 3,000 patients in total. It revealed that subjects with malocclusion were 4 to 6.6 times more likely to have idiopathic scoliosis, and that people who had idiopathic scoliosis were about twice as likely to have occlusion disorders, overjetting incisors, and to have TMJ dysfunction. First problem is none of these studies were prospective. So there was one retrospective cohort, 13 cross-sectional studies. So we can't say anything about causality. Besides that, the included studies were all of moderate to high quality. Well, that's not that bad, honestly. And I think it's highly probable that what causes the malformation in one spot causes malformation elsewhere. You know, how like another comparison could be like how fibromyalgia causes pain everywhere, for instance, or how Eliud and Alexis causes hypermobility, usually in multiple joints. It doesn't mean that fixing one will solve the others. You know, sometimes there's a simple cause for multiple things. It doesn't mean that it's connected, that it, you know, is it the chicken or the egg, or is it a different chicken that's laying all these eggs, you know? This paper also doesn't mean that this matters in healthy people. So Conor treats a lot of people and I think PRI in general makes random people that are completely healthy feel self-conscious about problems. They don't have scoliosis, but right now, then you go see the PRI guy and they're like, okay, like all my shit's fucked up. It's kind of problematic to extrapolate from scoliosis paper to healthy people. Yeah, there's a difference between what people like Conor would call poor posture and clinical scoliosis as well. The same way there's no documented use of a glucose monitor for healthy people, but could be super valuable for people in actual diabetes. So again, we should not conflate the two.
And this study suggests those with TMJ disorders tend to have a higher prevalence of postural abnormalities. This study found a correlation between crossbite and asymmetric positions of the spine, meaning those that had more lateral flexion or side bending of their spine.
Okay, so crossbite leads to unilateral problems. Let's look at that. So that's the Piancino. Okay, so Piancino in all 2023. It's a prospective paper of 87 children with unilateral posterior crossbite. Basically, like your molars, they're not perfectly aligned. And they compare them to 53 children with normal occlusion as a control group. So yeah, they have a control group, fine. And they saw that children who had a unilateral posterior crossbite, so UPC, tended to be able to do lateral flexion of the spine more on the crossbite side than on the other. Whereas lateral flexion was equal on both sides overall in the control group with normal occlusion. Again, could still be the same cause for both. They also found that lateral flexion became comparable on both sides after they were treated with functional orthodontic braces to make occlusion more symmetrical about 7 months later. They put a device in their mouth to kind of correct the UPC, and then they were like, oh, like your unilateral flexion is better. I got to say, the control group did not have a functional brace in place, so we have no clue if their posture could be changed if they had received an occlusion device as well. They were just retested at the same time as the active group, but there's no treatment controls. So basically, there's no actual control group. They just compared to people that were already normal, and they were like, when we do an intervention, it's better. But you could do a lot of things to improve range of motion on one side. There's a lot of like placebo effects. I'll show a presentation later where like literally you can just tell someone it's placebo and give them like a power band, and they become much more stable after, despite it being inert. And I wanted to know, this is like an okay study compared to the other one. Like, surprisingly, this is actually high quality. The biggest thing is, it's also bigger than the other ones. So this is like basically the only decent study that found an effect. And the reanalysis, so pre-post treatment, is based only on 38 patients. There's a lot of people that were not reanalyzed. So it's still a small paper. And also, if you look at Zurita Hernandez, which is a paper that has similar design, and several other papers, it says that the presence of UPCs, like so unilateral posterior crossbite, affects static body posture, but the side of crossbite is not related to the direction of effect on static body posture. Sorry. So crossbite didn't correlate with foot posture, though. So basically, again, it's just that like all these papers find effects, but it's on different directions, depending on like. I'll pull up the Zurita Hernandez paper. But basically, you'll see that basically that there's an effect, but the effect changes on each side. So there's not a meta-analysis has been conducted, but if there were, I'm pretty sure the effects would cancel out to some degree, at least. All right, let's keep going.
This stuff doesn't just affect our posture, it also very likely affects our movement as well. They found that those with more significant malocclusions, and this is what I really want you to remember, spent less time on the ground in their gait, and when they measured the right side of their body, they spent less time in particular in stance phase on that right side.
Okay, let's read that up. So patients diagnosed with malocclusion showed high-speed walking rhythm in comparison to patients with ankles. Like, my question is, why does this matter? Like, Ellie, do you have any comments? Like, why would this matter?
No, I don't understand why it would matter from even like a sports performance perspective. I mean, they keep asserting that the malocclusion has like, and I guess it does to some degree, but there's not the final step in saying like why that's actually causal or correlational to any disorders or gait disorders or like performance enhancements when it comes to gait or running or anything like that. They just say, hey, there's this like apparent correlation going on between like malocclusion or crossbite and like how much pressure you're putting on one foot versus the other. Like this asymmetry exists, and so like do what you want with it. Like that extra leap of extrapolation, I think, is where PRI really like goes to shit. And that's indicated in pretty much every paper that they're citing.
I think it's very similar to how Jordan Peterson, there's like someone I heard him described as like he's the guy who's gonna be racism -1. So just cite like weird correlations between like skin coloring, like crimes or whatever, and it's just like he's not saying it out loud, but he's just putting like stats there that are often like spurious or something, and not explaining the context behind it, and it's just like, oh, that's worrisome.
Yeah,
and
he's giving you 1350. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's I don't know. It's like saying that, like, those policies, I don't want to get political too much, but like, how they say like Portland and California became a haven for druggies or junkies after they basically made policies that made it easier to be a person that is struggling with addiction. And they're showing like, look, it doesn't work. It becomes a haven for people that have drug issues, but then they don't mention that like no one in the States does that except them. So obviously they're going to go there. But if they made it federal, maybe it would work,
Sure. Yeah.
So that's like, I'm not saying it would. I don't know. I'm not an expert in addiction, but I'm just saying that you have to provide the context to cite these weird correlations at least. I've also reviewed that paper, the Rosanska-Polinska paper. I'll put it up. And I'm going to share this tab instead. I'll let you read it. Dental malocclusion, mixed dentition's children, and its relation to postural system and gait parameters. So I'll let you read the abstract, and I'll tell you my analysis. So there's a cross-sectional study of 76 12 to 15-year-old kids examining occlusion type and its relationship to gait pattern measurements. First of all, in limitation, the examiners were not blinded. That's a big red flag, especially with something where people seem to have a vested interest. There's also way too many measurements that they did not perform the Bonferroni correction to compensate for that. So they had 14 outcomes, and only 3 displayed a statistically significant difference. It was the rhythm of the steps, the duration of gait cycle. I'll share this tab to show you. Duration of gait cycle, rhythm of the steps, and right step duration. So not left step. We don't know why, but that's apparently it's the right step matters, I guess, and the others don't. But after that, they don't mention all the other variables that don't matter. So that's an example of selective reporting or spin in the conclusion. So support duration during the percentage of the gait cycle that was spent in support duration was not statistically significant. Neither was swing duration, double support time, single support time, left step length, left step duration, left support duration, right support duration, left swing duration, right swing duration. So again, they have all these variables that are underpowered. They have like less than, they have about 5 patients per outcome. That's way too little. And again, when you do that, sometimes there's a way around it where you can do some tablecloth math and use what's called the Bonferroni correction. The Bonferroni correction is basically, we usually want the p-value to be at 0.05, right? You want it to be higher than that, the alpha value. You want the p-value to be whatever. P-value, you want it to be at 0.05 or smaller. So if you have 14 values, you'll just divide them by 14, and that's your new target. They didn't do that. They just assumed that if 1 is positive, then that's great. There's an old stats joke where it's like scientists will conduct a study, and they'll test the M&Ms, and they'll be like, oh, the yellow M&M doesn't cause cancer, and they'll test the blue M&M. Blue M&M doesn't cause cancer. And they do that, all the colors, and then they find the violet M&M causes cancer. And then the article title would be like, violet M&M causes cancer. It's just, if you try enough times, you will find a spurious correlation. So I think that's what's happening here. And also the fact that the right step only was significantly faster despite mixed occlusion problems. So it wasn't always on the same side of the occlusion. That suggests that it's just a spurious finding, because the theory is that malocclusion causes compensation below. So why are malocclusions on both sides causing compensations on the right side only? It doesn't make sense. You know what I mean? If it was a true relationship, it would always be the same direction, or most of the time, but it's not. And there's papers, again, showing the Zaria paper that I cited earlier. It doesn't matter the direction. So it's just things, I think it's just when you have things that could cause deformities in one spot, you'll have deformities other spots. Like maybe you have hypermobility, maybe your ligaments are more slack. Like maybe the guy from what's it called in I'll pull this picture, but the trader in 300, what's his name? The little deformed guy.
Yeah, I forget his name.
If he Altus, I'll share this. Like, do you think this guy, his back is all lumpy because his jaw is out of place, or do you think he has a congenital problem that causes most of his body to be deformed? Like, I think that's a good counterexample, even though it's a fake Zack Snyder movie. Okay, let's let Conor speak again. And don't worry, this is not the whole section. We're actually gonna have a productive talk about after this. This is just get through, let Conor shine and show the nuance in this discussion.
Those with less significant malocclusions or no malocclusions had more stable gait and they spent more time on the ground. Now, when we improve the position of the jaw and bite, there are studies that show improved, for example, running symmetry. This study looked at different types of runners and their individual patterns before using a splint and after using a splint that was made individually for them to help improve their occlusion and also the position of their jaw. And they found that it actually resulted in increased running symmetry.
Okay, I actually don't know that paper. So what's it called? Let's look at it together. Okay, so 2015. Let's look it up together. 20. Okay, wow. 20 healthy young recreational runners participated in this study. They use an 8-camera Vicon motion capture system. That's fine. That's valid. 4 different dental occlusion conditions in random order and performed 5 running trials per test condition on a level walkway with their preferred running shoes. Vector-based pattern recognition models, in particular cluster analysis and support vector machines, were used for movement pattern identification. So basically they had people and they looked at how they ran and then they gave them occlusion devices to see if that made them run more straight. No overall classification of the splint condition could be observed. Within individual subjects, different running patterns could be identified for the 4 splint conditions. The splint conditions lead to a more symmetrical running pattern. The influence of an occlusal splint on running pattern could be confirmed in this study. Wearing a splint increases the symmetry of the running pattern, more symmetrical. Okay, we'll have to review that one. I did not know, but the big caveat is it's 20 people. And again, they didn't control it. So if you do a study, let's see what they told, but I assume they told them it was about symmetry. Yeah. So if you have a study and then you tell people, hey, we're looking at symmetry, and then you give them the thing that's supposed to correct it, I assume they're supposed to be more symmetrical. But we'll have to review that paper. But just the fact that it's 20 people is like ridiculous. Okay, let's keep going.
Our body's posture and movement is heavily dependent on our relationship with the ground and the ability for us to sense the ground underneath us. And we understand that the jaw likely has an influence on our ability to sense the ground and be able to control our center of mass as it relates to the ground. When we shift onto one side of our body when we're walking through the world, let's say we're going right and we're going into our right stance phase of gait. We understand that we need the ground to be underneath our right foot to feel stable there. But we also have an increased ability to bite down and feel our back molars on the right side. Remember the role of the molars and the teeth in our ability to sense the ground. We have this because the maxilla right here is going to rotate slightly to the right side. And we have the mandible right here rotating slightly to the left side. So you have this sort of interplay like this, and that allows for increased bite sense on the right side. And if you were stuck in a pattern where you were lateralized to the right side, let's say you were in what we would call a right lateral pelvic tilt, usually what you see is a mandible or a jaw that is going to the left relative to a maxilla that's going to the right. And
I just want to reiterate that I cited the Zurita Hernandez paper, and one of his papers would show that, different occlusions lead to different sides. Like, it's not, the side of the malocclusion is irrelevant. So that theory doesn't jive with that. It doesn't make sense with that theory. It doesn't seem to matter where the malocclusion is. It's not like, oh, you have more bite on the right, then you're going to walk more on the left. It doesn't seem to work that way. It's more like if your bite is all fucked up, maybe you're going to walk all fucked up. And I'm using all fucked up in quotes here. It's just like maybe a little asymmetrical, but everyone's asymmetrical, and it usually is not a problem unless it's extreme. I think the Urasha paper from 2015 on, I think it's 2017 on like perimenopausal women or something. You need like even up to 47 degrees scoliosis did not seem to meaningfully influence pain. So I don't think these minute differences are important.
This is representing what this whole body posture is showing us. If you want to see the influence this can have on you, just gently bite down and see which side of your molars in the back contact more easily. For many people, that's going to be on the right relative to the left. And then go ahead and take your shoulder internal and external rotation measurement. Just lay on your back with your elbow out by your side like this and just let your arm drop until you feel like your shoulder is going to roll forward. And then go back and then stop once you feel like you have to push through resistance. And then take a popsicle stick and place it in the back teeth and very gently bite down on the side that you have less occlusion on. And just hold that. and then retest your measurement after that and notice a difference. Then go and then bite down on that popsicle stick gently on the back teeth where you touch more. And when you do that,
You know what's funny about that theory?
Yeah.
So he's basically trying to like walk through in a stepwise fashion with this example of external rotation, what like weightlifters will do or bodybuilders will do when they wear like a mouthpiece or a mouth guard.
Yeah.
It's like you can create more exertional force if you like bite down on something, because that just like it almost, from even like a placebo perspective, or I guess from like a mechanistic perspective, you're quote unquote creating more neurological drive. So if you have a popsicle stick in your mouth, I bet if you had the popsicle stick on the opposite side, if you were doing left-sided external rotation, you had the popsicle stick on the right side, I bet you could still get more external rotation on the left because you have something, a splint to bite down on and exert force on, and then basically act as like a counter force for your strain here with this external rotation. So I don't think it would matter where you even put the popsicle stick. He's just basically explaining what happens when you wear a mouth guard.
Yeah, there's three other explanations. I was going to get into that later, but I think it's relevant to speak about it now. There's the first effect, which is something Andrew Espino talks about a lot, where it's just like the easily fooled nervous system.
Yeah, 100%.
And it's just retesting, you're going to do better. Like just because you've done it already, you're like, oh, now I can do it. Like my body's safeguards, which, you know, when you get on the field, especially as you get older, you feel like rusty. I think a whole purpose of the warm-up is not necessarily to directly prevent injuries. It's more about doing like an engine check. You're like, oh, I need to be careful about this. Like my Achilles feels a bit tight or something, and get your body temperature up. And you're like, okay, I feel safe, so now I can go further. If you ever work with people with pain, it's extremely obvious when you're like, okay, this feels scary. And you're like, okay, do it again. And they go much further the second time. So you can find a lot of effects for that. So there's like, again, the easily fooled nervous system. And then there's a second, which is, when we went in PT school, we did EMGs on ourselves. And what you see is there's this phenomenon called recruitment. And, if you look at a streamlined plank, the recruitment is going to be very streamlined at the beginning. It's going to be like little bars, very few. Like the amplitude is going to be quite low. I don't know if that's the correct term, but basically the bar is not going to be up and down a lot. It's going to be close to the midline because the signal is very precise. You're just recruiting the minimal amount of muscles necessary because you're doing that task efficiently. When you get to the end where you're really tired, you're trying to find muscles that could also do that task. You're trying to recruit the whole muscle belly, and you're accidentally triggering other muscles. So that might be why we're shaking when we do a plank at the end. It's just because you're using muscles that it's not their primary function to hold that plank, right? So the electrical signal is kind of flooding surrounding musculature. The fact of biting on something could be just like, it's a way to like, fuck it, I'm just going to go all out on that muscle, including my jaw. Like I'm just going to contract everything. So it allows you, again, to go like 100% right away. It's like nitro. It's probably not, like you said, the direction of the bite. It's just the fact that you have something to bite against so it doesn't hurt your teeth. And that allows you to, again, to recruit more muscle right away. So that could be the other explanation. The third one is this presentation that I did with actually this professor. I did a post about this on neurohacking a while ago. This Australian professor, really good professor, Paul. He has a really cool accent. I don't think he's from Australia, but he has an amazing accent. It's Paul B2B is his Instagram. You should go follow him. He's actually like an actual good physio that cares. Like it's kind of rare to see. He's not like not jaded, which is I think is crazy. Okay, so let's do the stab. Okay, perfect. So
Sent it to me and wanted my take on it. The guy in it claims that you can increase hamstring flexibility immediately by stimulating the trochlear nerve, vagus nerve, and the hypoglossal nerve, which are cranial nerves. Obviously, that's a bunch of nonsense, but I think the actual reasons why that's happening are quite interesting. And to explain it, and I'll explain why his reasoning is nonsense, but to explain how it actually probably works, I've got a video done by Paul McCambridge from the University of South Wales. He's a lecturer there, and it's quite interesting. It might be a little bit long, but honestly, it's very interesting and very worth it. So I suggest you listen to that after. So one reason why this is nonsense is that it's like tickling someone, saying,
there we go. So these are the power bands that we used to use that we know are a scam.
Arms are going to be up strong. I'm going to push down on the elbow, and I'm going to try and do balance. I want you to imagine stick right through your shoulder. So if I push your arm down, the arm is going to go down like this. You're keeping it raised. So I'm going to push right here. That's right on the top if you can watch this, so we're going to be the same space. So 3, 2, 1, let's go. Okay, let's try again. 3, 2, 1, let's go. Not bad. Okay. Power band versus Boston Celtics.
Yeah, I just want to say that company was sued for making false claims. So this objectively does not work. And that's what he's going to tell him.
Arms up, leg up. Nice and strong with the arms. Is that the same place? You're sure? Let's go.
So now he has the band in his hand, and he's much better because he's retesting, and he gave him a placebo.
Test one. That's test one. You're still not convinced, even though we made you stronger. So what I want you to do is just watch first. Look at my thumb. I'm going to look at my thumb. Feet are facing forward. I'm going to rotate, and I'm going to keep rotating until I'm absolutely in my end. I cannot go anymore. And I want you to hold it there. Okay, so feet together. Left or right. Keep looking at the top. And then start to rotate until you get to the end, and then hold it there. There. Okay, hold it there. Hold it there. I'm going to pop this in your hand.
Okay, let's do the other one.
Your hand. Close it. Arms. Close it. Make sure you feel it. Can you feel it? Okay, I want you to try to go further. Lovely. Excellent. Relax. So we've got about an extra 15 degrees. You're still not convinced. This guy's hard, isn't he? 25 will put it down. If you landed right. Okay. Hamstring flexibility.
Adam Meekes also does the presentation this way. He literally just rubs people.
Okay, getting guarded resistance there. Don't know what that angle is. Let's say about 60 degrees. You're happy with that? Hold it. Magic. That got you! Close it, make sure you feel it.
Okay, so yeah. As you can see, it's extremely, again, they told him it's a placebo. They know it's a physio student. They know it's a placebo, and it still makes them better. So theory that putting a popsicle stick in your hand because it gets better, it's because my theory is correct, is extremely, extremely dubious. Especially since I could not see much biological plausibility. Like they were talking about like proprioception as if it makes it easier to see like where you are in space. It's like they can see where their arm is. Like if that was the case, like just looking at my hamstrings would make me more flexible. Probably way more because it's like the eyes are way better at providing like feedback of where you are in space than proprioception. Like I don't know. It's just to me it would be extremely surprising if that's the actual mechanism of how this happens, given again there's more simple explanation, more validated explanations that provide an easy explanation as to why you could observe this phenomenon. And again, go ahead. Yeah.
Real quick, this just like came to mind. I think that the weird thing too is wouldn't you also see like the inverse be observed if you like reverse the phenomenon? So like say like someone's molars lined up too much in the back, or say they had TMJ disorder and their molars on the right hand side, for example, were they were too compact. There was too much pressure on that right hand side. What if they put the popsicle splint in and worsened that pressure, but it made no difference on their posture whatsoever? Like you said, like you alluded to before, these things don't seem to matter what side the deformity or the asymmetry actually is on. So I would expect the inverse to also be true,
or
if
make
they
it
wanted
worse.
to create a study. Exactly.
Or make
That's
it
what I'm
worse.
saying.
Which is improbable. And yeah, we'll talk about it later, but this is where like the Vitruvian model does not work, and we're going to try to coin that because I think it's a very useful term. Okay, let's keep going.
Do that, your measurements get worse in many cases. And what that
Hang on,
represents, you touch after that and notice a difference. Then go and then bite down on that popsicle stick gently on the back teeth where you touch more. And when you do that, your measurements get worse in many cases. And what that represents
Okay, keyword in many cases. We'll probably try to get our followers to do that to see if that's true.
So hold on. I told you about the banana trick, right? I think we covered this maybe in
Yeah, go
another
ahead.
podcast.
Yeah, I'll just note it down.
We had to post about this too. So the banana trick was something that I did in chiropractic school because chiropractors are also completely obsessed with asymmetries and how it supposedly affects symptoms clinically. And so one time during class, I was measuring someone's leg length, and I literally put the banana that I had in my bag for lunch on their back and then remeasured, and their leg lengths, quote unquote, like evened out. Like for no reason. I literally just put a banana on their back. And whether or not the mechanism for that was like the absorption of potassium through the skin, maybe from the banana, or just like their nervous system being fooled because there was additional pressure on their mid back, and they knew that I was trying to level out their hips, quote unquote, level out. I think it's probably the fact that they knew that they were trying to get leveled out,
Yeah. So we'll run a test with my followers, see if that actually matters. And I don't, because he says in many cases, so I don't think he is convinced. Like,
is that our teeth grounding on one side improves our awareness and our sense of stability and even safety neurologically on that side. And that,
you know what else does that? Doing the movement a second time. Okay.
Unlocks tension on that side. This is a very repeatable and consistent thing. You can do this with anyone and you get very similar results. Now, if you have significant jaw influences on your posture, this is not something you can just fix by yourself. But there are exercises that are complementary to different interventions that allow us to get into a position of neutrality. Let's say I had a jaw that was deviated to the left because I was shifted over to the right side of my body. I'm in that right lateral pelvic tilt. What I could do is get myself in a position where my spine curves are relatively neutral, and then I gently push my jaw over to the right. And this oftentimes frees up the neck and a lot of those shoulder things we talked about earlier, because you are creating an opportunity for a better bite and better occlusion and better ground sense on the side that's missing it.
Save up to 15% off luggage, bags, and travel accessories.
We're starting in the safest, most relaxed position you can do this in. And it's the best for beginners. But you could do this in a seated position or even standing if you really wanted to. But generally, the more relaxed you are, the better. So we have our feet supported in a 90-90 right here. And we have a little towel roll underneath the neck. And it's just thick enough so that it's supporting us. And it shouldn't feel like it's so thick to where it's jamming our chin back, or it's too small where our chin falls forward. It should be just naturally supporting us. Now, there's a couple of different ways we can do this. But regardless, we're going to be pushing into our chin in some way, and we're going to be pushing our chin back against the resistance of our fingers for about a 2 out of 10 intensity. So it's an isometric contraction. And we're going to hold these things for about 5 to 10 seconds. Now, the first one we're going to do is place 2 fingers on the side of the chin. We'll do the right side, for example, right here. It shouldn't be too far back on the jaw right here, just on the side of the right chin there. And all we're going to do is just 2 out of 10, push our jaw to the left. But we're going to fight that, and we're going to resist that, and we're going to keep our chin going to the right. But ultimately what's going to happen is it's not really going to move. The chin's going to stay in the same place because it is that isometric contraction. And we're going to hold that for about 5 to 10 seconds. The other thing that we can do is we can press our chin back with 2 fingers like this. So we're going to try to protrude our jaw, but we're going to push against that, 2 out of 10 to start. And we're going to try to push our jaw forward, isometric contraction. We're going to start most people with about 1 to 2 minutes of total time, taking about a 5 to 10 second break in between each 5 to 10 second rep. And as I mentioned, 2 out of 10 to start, but you want to add 1 out of 10 intensity every couple of days. So for example, start at 2 for the next couple of days, then go to a 3 for the next couple of days, and go to a 4 to a 5, but you don't want to ever really go past a 5. You want to stay at a 5 for a couple of weeks or as long as you need to. But what about the studies that didn't show a correlation? Well, it's important to discuss those as well, to be fair to what the research shows. Now, some of the splint studies did show really positive results and others didn't. And the reason why I think the ones that didn't get results had the outcomes that they did was because of the way that the splints were being made. Now, you can build it up on one side more than the other, so that way you can create more even contact of your teeth. But again, it depends on how it's being made. When people create these splints, a lot of the times they're not taking into account the position of the cranium and also the cervical spine and the rest of the body posture. Now, to be transparent, in a lot of these studies, they did not describe the position the body was in when they took the impressions to make these splint devices. And that might be a big hint right there. In order for us to be able to properly create some sort of appliance that improves the position of the jaw and the bite, we have to take everything into account. And I think a lot of people aren't doing that. And
hang on, let me see what papers he said did not show effects.
You know what this is like? This is just like a kid trying to figure out how they get Christmas presents underneath the Christmas tree. and being like, okay, I know the Christmas presents appear, and I think that it's because of Santa Claus. I can't prove that, but I think that I can't find Santa Claus because my measuring device, like my tool, just can't find Santa Claus. Like I can't measure the magical abundance of energy around the Christmas tree, but I know the Christmas presents actually exist underneath the tree. Like he's like nitpicking. He's nitpicking things that probably don't even matter in the greater study design.
Yeah, the expression I believe is tooth fairy science. You can conduct a perfectly valid study, but if it doesn't exist, if it's not valid, a reliable study, replicable study, but if it's not about something valid, it still doesn't matter.
Are you pulling up a study right now?
Yeah, the studies he talked about, the Ferraro and Isaiah, I'll give him credit. He cited studies that contradict him. So huge respect to Conor here. Honestly, genuinely a lot of respect because no one does that. But yeah, that they just don't support his claim, and it's a leap of faith that he's willing to make. That it's because the splints were done wrong. So we can look at what we can do. We can look at if there's an overlap in the authors. So let me see.
Have you read the Miro study about mouth guards? I just found this.
Yeah. The running one. I pulled it up earlier. So I said it was just 20 people. That's the big one. But I said we have to do a post eventually about it because that one fell through the cracks. I didn't see that one.
No, this Miro is a systematic review about different types of mouth guards and their effects on like isometric strength, dynamic strength, and all that stuff.
Can you share your screen?
It shows ridiculously mixed results. Yeah, it's not like they can provide any crazy conclusions from this.
Okay, hang on. Let me just do the people that were in the Isaiah 2019 paper that contradicts them.
Mm-hmm.
Were they dentists? No, I don't know what their profession were, but I mean, it's a weird assumption to be like, no, they did it wrong in that paper, and
100%.
all the others, they did it correctly. Where it's like, why wouldn't you assume that they did it wrong in the studies that show an effect?
Well, this is the same thing as Stu McGill on non-specific low back pain. It's like you're just actually not good enough at diagnosing when it's actually like, it actually might not matter at all.
And also, again, we're reiterating that fact that it doesn't seem to matter the side of the asymmetry in a lot of these papers. And a lot of these papers, it doesn't even matter that you have an asymmetry. So again, it's like less than half of these papers that have an unpredictable direction of an effect, if they have an effect at all. So again, it's a weird assumption, I think. Let me see if he has. Well, yeah, we'll clean up the papers that we haven't gone over. But you want to talk about the Mirror paper?
Okay, can you see?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, all right. Acute effects of wearing bite-aligning mouth guards on muscular strength, power, agility, and quickness in a trained population, a systematic review. So if we just go down, like this is a surprisingly long paper.
Yeah.
Where they had several different outcomes that they measured. But one of the main points that I want to point out is there was 3 forms of mouth guards in several different papers. So one is a custom-made mouth guard, one is a self-adapted mouth guard, and one is just a standard mouth guard. And they all show like mixed results, which is kind of similar to what Conor was showing. But then some of them, even the custom-made ones, don't fix or provide any performance benefits, which is contrary to kind of what he's preaching there. So if we look at like...
Ooh, that's a big hammer going down.
Dynamic strength and power. So the relationship between the use of mouth guards and dynamic strength has been examined in 20 articles. On the one hand, upper body muscle strength was evaluated in 6 of these studies, essentially focusing on bench press and bench throw actions. 2 of these articles, 23 and 35, found positive effects. And then here's the part that I want to get to. All the other studies found no significant differences. So there was how many? There was 6, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 showed no significant differences for upper body output. And then if we go down, it just keeps measuring. Lower body is all of these studies. So assessing lower body dynamic strength and power, vertical jumps, positive effects in at least one of the assessed variables. 8 of the 9 studies were performed using CMM. So it shows pretty mixed results. I mean, 3 to 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 3 to 4 in this one. So we should definitely do a deep dive into this because this is kind of going into like what he's talking about with splints and shows that even custom-made mouth guards sometimes do not outperform like normal, regular, not custom mouth guards at all, and sometimes have no effect whatsoever.
I think that's
so pretty cool.
Yeah, I think we could draw a parallel between, how for patellofemoral pain, it is recommended to use insoles, but sham insoles perform just as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Like it works. I tell people to get them, but I tell them to buy the ones that you can get at the store. There might be some cases, some case uses where foot orthoses prescribed by a podiatrist are probably better than sham ones. My bias is probably like foot issues or ankle issues, where the biomechanics are probably more closer to the locus of nociception, where like there it could be relevant. But when it's above, it's probably you're just modifying something and then it feels good.
Right.
Kind of like you're just, it doesn't matter how you're modifying biomechanics, you're just changing something, or you're just providing a placebo. I have no idea, honestly. I'm not going to pretend I do. But the point is, it's kind of akin to that. So if we could call this an a fortiori argument. I use that term a lot, but it's like a law term. But basically what it means is like, if something that has more claim to be true isn't true, then the other thing should not. So the example could be like, if you can't bring a chihuahua to a park, the dog park, to a park, you can't bring a dragon either, even though the law doesn't say that. So the point is, if insoles, which, you know, it's a weight-bearing joint, the foot, if insoles or like foot orthoses do not seem to help, do not seem to help directly, or at least not via changes in biomechanics, because sham works just as well, it'd be extremely like surprising if your jaw affects your back pain because it's a non-weight bearing joint. Again, it'd be extremely weird that would have an effect, right? Because one is much more biologically plausible and it doesn't, and the other is like it's a crackpot theory in my opinion, and then that would work. It doesn't really make sense in my opinion. Again.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a similar thing with like ergonomics and chairs, right? It's like even if you work on the local spot where the pain is supposedly occurring and you change the biomechanics or the static posture of that segment of the spine, it has like no real benefit.
Yeah, same thing with shoulders. Like Hogan 2020 is one of my favorite papers. So they showed, I can pull it up. I had that saved up. We're kind of hopping around the presentation, which was super fucking long. Hang on. Where's my Hogan paper? You know what? I'll just pull it up. So Hogan meta-analyses of scapular dyskinesis. And it also ties into my point I made earlier. So they looked at prospective studies on scapular biomechanics and looked at whether that influenced shoulder injuries in the future. So it was a systematic review of meta-analyses from Campbell Hogan from 2020. So a systematic search was conducted, and 7 studies were eligible for inclusion, but it only took papers that were prospective. For those that are not familiar, prospective means that they take people before they incur an injury or pain or the outcome of interest, like before they get cancer or something. It's not like looking at people that already have cancers as diet. It's more like looking at people's diet and then seeing who gets cancer in the future. That's relevant because that's an easy way to, you can start to make a guess as to whether it's the chicken or the egg because you're looking at one first. So basically they looked at whether people moved wrong, and I'm using that in quotation marks if you're listening to the audio, because we don't really have a consensus on what's wrong in terms of scapular dyskinesis. And it showed that there was 212 shoulder injuries observed across 923 athletes across all these studies, and scapular dyskinesis was present in 46% of participants, and these athletes had an injury rate of 25%. The presence of scapular dyskinesis displayed a trend to increase the risk of shoulder injury, but this was not statistically significant. So it was a risk ratio of 1.07 with an overlap with 0. So 0.85 to 1.34. So there's no meaningful difference. So conclusion, scapular dyskinesis was not significantly associated with the development of shoulder injury in athletes. So basically, again, that's the problem when, like for the TMJ issues, they're always relying on retrospective papers. So a lot of people, when they have pain, also that's another explanation for this, when you have pain, you're going to stand differently. Like, what's one thing that people do when they have pain? Like, we move people all the time and we look at their pain threshold. What did someone do when you move their shoulder too far? I'm asking you.
They wince, they freak out, they run away from you.
What
do
you do when you wince? You clench your jaw. So it could also be that the pain is causing the different posture. It could also be just the way that you're tilting your head to bounce when you're unbalanced at the spine. Let's say you have scoliosis, is affecting through gravity which teeth are in contact. Right? It could be as simple as that. Like, again, chicken or the egg, but there's no prospective papers, so we cannot make that claim. But when we look at stuff that has more biological plausibility, again, we're looking at scapular dyskinesis, so basically how your shoulder blade is influencing your shoulder pain, it doesn't seem to have an effect, and that's much more plausible. There's much more serious scientists that have peered years of research into this, and they're like, yeah, we can't really find like a meaningful difference. why the fuck would your jaw influence your back pain or your foot pain or your foot pressure? It's like in a meaningful way, or a way that you should focus on in the limited time that you have allotted to yourself. I couldn't for the life of me figure that out. And then also the scapular dyskinesis discussion could be extended by this paper by Takeno, and also another one of my favorites. So Takeno 2020, I think it's motor control exercises. I remember the design, but basically what they did, so therapeutic interventions for scapular kinematics and disability in patients with subacromial impingement, a systematic review. So what we would call today rotator cuff related shoulder pain or rotator cuff tendinopathy or subacromial pain. Basically what they did, again, only they took RCTs and they looked at people that had interventions where the intervention's goal was to change scapular kinematics, so to correct the poor movement of the scapula, the dyskinesia. And they looked at whether people got better, and they did. The motor control exercises helped, and that's nothing new. We know that motor control can help. The problem is that it wasn't due to a change in biomechanics. So we see standardized mean difference between pre-intervention and post-intervention measures with 95% confidence intervals were calculated. We observed that the disabilities of the arm, shoulder, hand scores improved. So people got better, so mean difference of 0.85, it's not bad. We did not observe changes in scapular upward rotation, posterior tilt, or internal rotation. Conclusion: the short and long-term therapeutic interventions for subacromial impingement syndrome improved patient-reported outcomes, but not scapular kinematics. The identified improvements in shoulder pain and function were not likely explained by changes in scapular kinematics. And that's something a lot of people don't understand. When we criticize things, a lot of the times we're not saying, hey, this doesn't help people. We think it helps. Like, movement in general is helpful, especially if it's done in a reduced load. But it's just probably not for the crackpot reason people are giving. It's probably just because they got moving with confidence and they maybe reduced overtraining or reduced sedentary lifestyles. Right? I think what we do is we kind of bring balance a lot of the time. So if someone's super sedentary, you give them a bit of movement, maybe it helps. Maybe you have someone who's completely overtraining, you give them motor control exercises, it distracts them until they get better. And maybe makes them explore a little bit more range of motion. That makes maybe, sometimes you gain range of motion and you can move differently, and that's helpful. But the point is, it's not because your intervention works, that it is for the reason that you think of. And again, I'm reiterating the same thing. This is a way more plausible explanation, and it doesn't check out. So I don't think changing your jaw position is going to solve your foot pain or your hip pain. Because this is a local intervention that doesn't have a local effect. So why would a distal intervention on a non-weight bearing joint? And again, how many joints are we removed from the foot? So it's like the jaw, all the vertebrae. So let's be clement and say like the spine is one joint. So that's 1, 2. You got the hip, that's 3. You got the knee, that's 4. You got the ankle, that's 5. And you got the foot, that's 6. You're 6 joints away. And that's the key to your pain, I guess. Because that totally makes sense. Even though one joint away doesn't do a difference. Even the joint itself, kinematics being changed doesn't do a measurable difference. So yeah, I think we can get the kind of the point. So do you have anything to add to this? Because I feel like I've been rambling for hours.
No. I was going to bring up just the ergonomics of low back pain and how I think like the ergonomic chairs are the equivalent of almost like an occlusal splint. And even like in ergonomic studies, we see that the ergonomics of a chair actually does.
Yeah, this will be on all platforms. So when this is up, if you can give us a good review, if you liked it, if you don't like it, just, I don't know. Just don't say anything, please. We need this to go well.
Yeah, give us a good review on Spotify. That'd be helpful.
But it'll be on all platforms. And it'll be edited down also. This is like the long version for people who just want this stuff right away, but we'll shave it down and we'll also do reels to make it more streamlined online for audio listening. You can find me on all platforms at Nobullshitphysio, YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter mostly.
Yep, and I'm on all platforms as well at The Rehab Cairo.
All right, this was the Fact Check podcast. You can find us probably next month, and we'll probably have Diego. I don't know if I can say his name. Yeah, Diego, the skeptical physio guy, super interesting guy from Spain. So it'll be an international podcast. Well, I mean, it already is because I'm Canadian and Eliud's in Chicago area. As far as I know, yeah, Illinois, I guess. But yeah, so I guess we'll see you next month, and hopefully this will be good. All right, have a good one.
Sweet. Peace.